Charles Kuralt had a knack for reminding America of its human side. The CBS newsman died Friday in New York, but left his road trip tales as a legacy.
Charles Kuralt was more than just a journalist. He was America's storyteller. For decades, he crisscrossed the country with CBS's On the Road, uncovering small-town wonders, celebrating ordinary people, and reminding viewers that beauty could be found in the simplest places. His warm voice and gentle manner made him a household name, a figure viewers trusted almost like family. To the public, Kuralt was the image of honesty and authenticity. But there was another side to him, one that very few knew about. Behind the charm and the folksy television presence, Kuralt was living a double life. For more than 30 years, he managed to balance two worlds, one with his wife of decades and another with a woman hidden away in Montana. He built her a life, bought her land, and spent holidays with her, all while maintaining his role as a faithful husband in the public eye. How did he manage to keep such a secret for so long? The answer lay in his job. As a man constantly on the road, disappearing for weeks at a time was part of the profession. No one questioned his absences. His travels became the perfect cover, a cloak that allowed him to maintain a relationship that would have shocked his viewers, and perhaps destroyed his carefully crafted image. When Charles Kuralt died in 1997, the truth came spilling out. What began as whispers quickly turned into a legal battle, exposing details that stunned the nation. Fans who thought they knew him were suddenly forced to reconcile two very different pictures of the same man. This is the hidden story of Charles Kuralt, the beloved journalist who lived a double life, and the clever ways he got away with. Charles Kuralt was never the kind of journalist who thrived on breaking news or political scandals. He wasn't chasing crime stories or exposing corruption in Washington. Instead, he built his reputation by focusing on something entirely different, the small towns and ordinary people that most networks overlooked. When CBS launched On the Road in 1967, Kuralt was given the opportunity to travel across the country in a motorhome with a small crew, searching for human interest stories. This simple concept would change his life forever, making him one of the most beloved figures in American television. Audiences were instantly drawn to Kuralt's warmth. He had an almost grandfatherly quality, a voice that was calm and reassuring, and a way of telling stories that made viewers feel connected to strangers in distant places. To millions of Americans, Kuralt became a trusted companion every week. His stories were not about celebrities or politicians. They were about farmers, craftsmen, fishermen, teachers, and ordinary folks who embodied the quiet dignity of everyday life. Kuralt became a symbol of trust and simplicity in a world often dominated by chaos. His segments stood apart from the fast pace of nightly news. Instead of rushing through headlines, Kuralt lingered, allowing viewers to feel the beauty of a small-town diner or the pride of a man who spent decades perfecting his craft. By the 1970s and 80s, On the Road had cemented his reputation as the journalist who cared about the real America. His fans believed he was as genuine and wholesome as the stories he told. But there was another side to this success. While Kuralt's career was celebrated, his lifestyle also gave him an unusual degree of freedom. Unlike anchors tied to a studio desk, Kuralt's job required constant travel. It wasn't unusual for him to be gone for weeks at a time, sometimes months, exploring the highways and back roads of the United States. If he missed holidays or anniversaries, no one questioned it, because it was part of his job. His wife, Suzanne Petty-Baird, understood that this was the life she had married into. A husband who was always on the move, living out of suitcases, constantly away from home. This routine, however, became the perfect cover for something else. Because Kuralt was expected to be absent, no one was surprised when he was. Colleagues thought he was chasing stories. His wife assumed he was filming segments. Audiences imagined him in a different small town every night. In reality, some of those disappearances were not for work at all, but for a secret life he was carefully building in Montana. Kuralt was not a man who enjoyed being scrutinized. Though he was famous, he remained intensely private. He rarely discussed his personal life, avoided gossip, and let his work speak for itself. But this same preference for privacy also allowed him to carefully separate his two identities. To the world, he was the devoted journalist who dedicated his life to America's hidden stories. To those who knew the truth, he was also a man leading a double existence, one foot in his marriage and another in a long-term relationship that few could have imagined. Looking back, it's almost as if Kuralt's professional skills and his personal secrets were intertwined. He was a master storyteller, someone who knew what details to share and which to leave out. He could craft a narrative that made sense to his viewers, never giving away more than he intended. In his personal life, he did the same, offering just enough to maintain appearances, while hiding the reality of what was happening behind the scenes. To his fans, Charles Kuralt was the man who traveled the highways to remind America of its heart and soul. But what no one realized then was that those same highways also led him into a hidden life, one that would remain carefully guarded until the day he died, lit for decades. While Charles Kuralt was winning Emmy Awards and the admiration of millions of Americans, he was also quietly building a second life far from the cameras. That hidden world centered on Montana, along the Big Hole River, where he shared a private relationship with a woman named Patricia Shannon. Kuralt met Shannon in the 1960s, not long after he began his On the Road series. Their connection grew quietly but deeply, and over time it evolved into something that went beyond an affair. Unlike fleeting relationships, what Kuralt and Shannon had lasted decades. He wasn't just a visitor in her life, he was a permanent presence. He purchased property for her, built a cabin, and returned year after year, spending time in the rugged Montana landscape. The Big Hole River cabin became a sanctuary for Kuralt, a place where he could escape the pressures of television, deadlines, and his highly visible career. For Shannon, it was a life built in the shadows. While Kuralt's wife Patty lived in New York, believing her husband's absences were the demands of his work, Shannon knew the truth. Holidays that might otherwise have been spent with his wife were often spent with her in Montana. He bought her not only the cabin, but also additional parcels of land, quietly securing a future he knew might one day be difficult to explain. What made this double life so effective was Kuralt's job itself. His endless travel schedule provided the perfect cover story. If he disappeared for 2 weeks in December, no one thought it strange. He was simply on the road. If he didn't make it home for Thanksgiving or Christmas, colleagues assumed he was filming segments somewhere in America. His wife accepted the absences as part of the career she had supported for decades. In truth, Kuralt was often celebrating those moments beside Shannon in Montana. The two lived as a kind of secret family, but one without children, without neighbors prying, and without the burden of public recognition. Montana offered isolation, and that isolation was precisely what allowed their arrangement to thrive. Shannon lived quietly, content with the knowledge that Kuralt was giving her both his affection and material security. Still, the relationship was complicated. Kuralt never left his wife, and Shannon never demanded that he do so. Instead, they both accepted a kind of compromise. Kuralt remained the public husband and father figure in New York, while Shannon became the partner who shared his love of the outdoors and solitude. In many ways, the arrangement suited them both. Kuralt's love of the road and of privacy meant he could split his time without ever raising serious suspicion. Yet, beneath the surface, the secrecy came at a cost. Shannon was in many ways invisible. While Kuralt's wife received public recognition, Shannon was left unnamed and unacknowledged. For 30 years, she lived in the shadows of his fame, dependent on his discretion. Kuralt, meanwhile, carried the burden of maintaining two worlds that could never collide without disaster. But if he ever feared exposure, he never showed it. Kuralt had mastered the art of compartmentalization. The man who told millions of stories on television had written one of his own, a private narrative where he could be both the trusted journalist and the secret partner. This arrangement lasted until the very end of his life. Only when Kuralt died in 1997 would the carefully constructed walls between these two worlds collapse. His death revealed not only the depth of his relationship with Shannon, but also a series of financial and legal arrangements that would shock his family and fans alike. For 3 decades, Charles Kuralt had managed to live a double life undetected. But death has a way of uncovering the truths that even the best storytellers can't control. In July of 1997, Charles Kuralt's voice fell silent. At just 62 years old, the man who had spent decades roaming the highways of America succumbed to lupus, a disease that had quietly plagued him in his final years. To the public, his passing felt like the loss of a trusted family member. Tributes poured in from across the country. Viewers, colleagues, and admirers remembered him as the gentle journalist who captured the soul of small-town America. But behind the grief and the glowing obituaries, another story was beginning to unfold. One that would shatter the carefully constructed image Kuralt had spent a lifetime building, just weeks before his death. Kuralt had written a letter to Patricia Shannon, the woman he had secretly shared his life with for nearly 3 decades. In shaky handwriting, he asked her to inherit the Montana property they had enjoyed together, a cabin and land along the Big Hole River. It was meant to be a simple request, a gesture to ensure that the place they had built together would remain hers. But it was anything but simple. Kuralt's wife, Suzanne Petty Baird, had no idea about Shannon or about the property or about the long-term relationship her husband had maintained behind her back. When Kuralt died, his letter to Shannon became a flashpoint. Shannon claimed the Montana property belonged to her, citing the note and their long history together. Petty, however, believed the estate belonged entirely to her as Kuralt's legal wife. What might have remained a private arrangement between Kuralt and Shannon suddenly exploded into a public legal battle. Courtrooms, headlines, and lawyers became the stage where Kuralt's double life was revealed in detail. The lawsuit dragged on for years, peeling back layer after layer of Kuralt's secret. Shannon testified about their decades-long relationship, the holidays spent together, the land he had purchased in her name, and the life they had shared in Montana. Letters, documents, and property records all supported her claims. Slowly, the portrait of America's most trusted storyteller began to shift. He was still the journalist people loved, but now he was also a man who had deceived his family and the public for decades. Fans were stunned. The man who had made his career celebrating honesty and authenticity had lived with an extraordinary secret. His double life became as famous as the stories he once told on television. While many still admired his work, others could not reconcile the image of the kind, devoted journalist with the man who had maintained a hidden relationship for 30 years. For Petty, the revelations were devastating. She had believed her husband's long absences were for work, not another woman. For Shannon, the fight for recognition was bittersweet. Though she eventually secured her right to the Montana property, she remained forever cast as the other woman in Kuralt's story. In the end, Kuralt's death did more than mark the loss of a great journalist. It exposed the fragile balance of the double life he had carefully protected. For years, his career on the road had been the perfect cover, but once he was gone, the truth could no longer be contained. His handwritten letter, intended as a quiet act of love, became the very evidence that shattered the illusion. Charles Kuralt's passing forced the world to see him differently, not just as a beloved journalist, but as a man with flaws, contradictions, and secrets that even he couldn't take to the grave. When the truth about Charles Kuralt's double life emerged, it didn't just surprise his family, it shocked the entire country. For decades, Kuralt had been the face of integrity and warmth, a journalist who represented everything trustworthy in American television. His stories weren't about fame or power, but about the dignity of everyday people. That's why the revelation of his secret relationship in Montana was so jarring. Fans had to come to terms with the fact that the man they had trusted so deeply had been hiding something monumental. The court battle between his widow, Suzanne Petty Baird, and Patricia Shannon stretched on for years. Lawyers combed through Kuralt's finances, property deeds, and personal letters. Shannon, who had remained in the shadows for decades, suddenly became a public figure against her will. She wasn't just fighting for the Montana cabin and land. She was fighting for recognition of the life she and Kuralt had quietly built together. In 2000, The Montana Supreme Court ruled in Shannon's favor, honoring Kuralt's handwritten note and granting her the property. Legally, she won the battle. But in the court of public opinion, the story was far more complicated. To some, she was seen sympathetically as the woman who had genuinely loved Kuralt and been promised security. To others, she was simply the other woman, a symbol of betrayal. For Patty, the pain was lasting. She had spent decades believing her husband's absences were the sacrifices of a career devoted to storytelling. Discovering that those absences often meant time with another woman was a deep personal wound. Yet despite her grief, she continued to guard the more traditional image of Kuralt as a journalist and husband, refusing to let scandal completely overshadow his legacy. As the years passed, the story of Kuralt's double life became a cautionary tale about the distance between public image and private truth. His reputation as a journalist remained intact. On the Road continued to be remembered as one of the most heartfelt programs in American television history. His work is still taught in journalism classes as an example of human interest storytelling done with empathy and grace. But the revelation of his private life forever complicated his legacy. He became, in a sense, two people in the public's memory: the warm storyteller who made America fall in love with its forgotten corners, and the man who deceived those closest to him. His life forced fans and colleagues to confront a hard truth that even the most trusted figures can lead lives far more complicated than they appear. Yet perhaps the enduring lesson of Kuralt's story lies in this very contradiction. He was not perfect, and he was not the flawless man viewers imagined him to be. He was a human being, with flaws, secrets, and mistakes, just like the people he so often celebrated on the road. His double life was messy and painful, but it was also undeniably real. Today, Charles Kuralt is remembered in two ways. His journalism still inspires, reminding viewers of a gentler America, one built on small moments and ordinary lives. But his personal story lingers as a reminder that even the most public lives are filled with private complexities. The man who once told the hidden stories of others left behind the most startling hidden story of all, his own.